probably most people know this, were Milwaukee and Cleveland, right? And those emerged in the early 1990s. And again, part of the the same kind of cultural impetus, right? The defunding of the public sector, the middle class and white flight, the decline of the urban tax base and urban property tax base in particular. So, the voucher systems in those two cities spend the disproportion of their money in sending kids to parochial schools. 96% of all funding through the voucher system in Cleveland is to parochial school. Why is that? Two reasons. One is because parochial schools have lost their population in the inner city because there aren't that many Catholics who live there. Parochial school attendance is generally declining because people don't live in those communities and educate their children in the same ways they did 50 years ago. And so that there's a capacity in the inner city, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that the vouchers don't pay enough to do anything but send kids to parochial school. So if the funding level is only adequate for parochial schools, which have relatively lesser costs for a lot of reasons, though their costs are going way up because nuns don't teach in parochial schools much anymore, so that you actually have to pay teachers. But generally, the voucher systems are a pass-through for transferring public monies to religious education. So that's part of the history of transferring public funds to private schools in Ohio. Voinovich, also a Cleveland Catholic, saw, and someone who is not a doctrinaire right-winger, but did play in the ballpark for a very long time. So in 1997, in his as governor, and this was starting to occur throughout the country, possibly through a centralized template, I don't really know, began allowing public monies to be used for charter schools. So allowed for the formation of charter schools. One of his major funders is a guy named David Brennan, who is an industrialist from Akron, who gave a fortune to Republican campaigns, including the Voinovich campaigns. And he's White Hat Enterprises is the major for-profit public school entity in the state of Ohio. So there's not only an ideological aspect to this, but there's also a significant financial aspect to it as well. So charter schools have burgeoned throughout the state since around 2000, and that movement has been accelerated by the fact that No Child Left Behind also creates its own voucher system for students in failing inner city schools. And of course, using our local examples, kids who are going to Taft Elementary are not going to be welcome at Seven Hills, nor could they pay for it because the voucher is inadequate. So what they've done is revive these inner city Catholic schools, which are largely funded by vouchers, as well as certain private devices. Carl Lindner, for example, has been highly instrumental in funding the 6 Catholic inner city schools. So what this has done is further defund an already in danger entity. And the way that the charter school funding works is that the full state proportion of per pupil funding goes with that student to the charter school, or if there's a voucher system in the parochial school, including some funding that the district would never get. So it's actually more than dollar for dollar, and there's a complexity in Ohio school funding that I need not get into right this second. But suffice to say that these laws were drawn up with the intention of defunding the public schools. And particularly inner city public schools. As somebody once said to me, if you sent the Cincinnati public teachers to Wyoming, they'd be great teachers then. So, really the issue is not, what this is a further attempt to defund the public sector. The issues of school achievement are really the largest social issue, which every educator in the world knows. But, there's a lack of will to devote the resources to funding the poor and the dispossessed who are left in the inner cities. and as a result, we have these various band-aids which have the effect of disrupting the public, transferring funds to entrepreneurial, privately held charter schools and parochial schools, you know, as a kind of ideological intention. So, you know, what we're really seeing is the, you know, and part of the issue here is the teachers' unions as well. You know, which is, we're getting this now too, as people involved in the higher ed sector, that the idea is that, you know, that is also part of the public, right? The domain of the public unions. And the idea that there's any ensconced power in those entities means that there's not a kind of free rein for free marketeers to do what they want. So that, you know, what you really have is a kind of stripping off of, you know, of the idea of society as an organized unit, as a coherent entity. And I think it's really interesting, two things, and then I'll stop talking. I think it's really interesting, the Obama administration has not fully dismantled No Child Left Behind, number one. And number two, I think it's really interesting that their model of education reform has been to beat on teachers for the lack of, you know, rather than, again, to look at the comprehensive problems of urban education, in some cases rural education, rather than consider those as social problems. What they've done is they restricted it to the reification of statistical measures in the classroom. And, you know, so, you know, this helps us to think about, you know, the lesser of two evils theory of governance that we're faced with here. So I have, I don't think I have anything else to say, but I think that, you know, you can see this as incremental, and really it's part of a device to defund the public, and it's a means of, you know, moving money out of the public sector and freeing it for, often for people who already have money. So, you know, ideally if the, you know, for people on the right, ideally if the public school system ceases to exist, you know, and this is part of the American Enterprise Institute models, every parent would get a pot of money for their child, and they'd get to go shop that wherever they wanted. Well, of course, middle class and upper middle class and upper class parents would be getting a free subsidy to send their children wherever they want, which they would supplement. Poor people would be stuck exactly where they are now. So, I'm done.
Thank you.
You see where Kate wanted to raise the vouchers, $220,000 a year?
Yeah, so that's giving more vouchers. It's not raising the value of each voucher.
Right. No, I'm saying that the income cutoff got raised.
Yeah.
For forgotten middle class.
So, perfect.
So we're at the final part of the educational forum, though we will open up the floor for discussion at the end. So as the last sort of session within this larger session, we wanted to think about as a heuristic model that we offer up as a conjectural possibility for potential ramifications if the University of Cincinnati becomes a charter university. And so far we've talked about Professor Cronin, his exposure of the American Legislative Exchange Council, the rise of the American conservative movement, and the charter school movement within the United States, but within Ohio specifically, as a way of thinking about what would be the potential ramifications of a charter university. And this is